I would probably say go find somebody doing what you want to do and go learn from them versus going to school to learn it. You may still want to go to school at some point, but I wouldn't say you have to go to school to become the person you want to become. Go learn from the person doing the things you're most excited about.
Hey, it's Rocky. Welcome to Richer Soul. Today's guest is Julie Broad, who will share her life journey and the insights she learned along the way. Imagine it's 12 months from now, and you've achieved your major life goals. How does it feel to be in the best shape of your life? To wake up energized, excited about the day? To have great relationships and friends who support you and propel you forward? How does it feel to have an excess of money, to be able to make the choices you want? To be fearless and open to trying new adventures? Imagine being connected to the universe and it providing everything you desire. It's possible over time, and your past does not dictate your future. The only thing holding you back from this vision is you. It's time to take control of our thoughts and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Richer Soul, where we achieve our dreams and create harmony to health, wealth, relationships, time, and spirituality. If you have not had a chance to listen to episodes 1 through 9, I encourage you to go back and listen to the framework behind Richer Soul and how to create the life of your dreams. You can also find all the show notes for this episode at richersoul.com. Today's quote is brought to us by Morgan Housel. $81.5 billion of Warren Buffett's $84.5 billion came after his 65th birthday. Our minds are not built to handle such absurdities. See, this is the power of compounding. It's amazing what happens over time. You take little steps and you just keep going. Let's face it. If Warren stopped working at 65, he wouldn't be who he is today. And if he didn't live that much past 65, he wouldn't have the money. But here he is at a ripe old age, and his money just keeps growing. I hope to be in the same situation myself. Before we continue, let's review last week's action step, which was to get rid of seed oils, vegetable oils, throw them out. See, if we want to live a long, healthy life, we've got to eat healthy food. And the problem is this stuff is in everything. And all of us are going to get affected differently by it. Even top restaurants put vegetable oil in their food. I wish we had more regulations on food that prevented this. If you've ever been to Europe, you'll notice things are different. And I think they use higher quality ingredients and they have more rules to help make it a little bit better for us. If you haven't read Morgan Housel's book on the psychology of money, where that quote came from, it is a great read and you should check it out. And I should probably get him on the podcast. Our theme today as we go through is what is true. Too often we're told X by society, but is it true? If you've ever watched Adam Ruins Everything, he's got many great videos to bring this to life. I remember when I was a kid, if you had a sore throat, you pretty much got your tonsils out. Not so much anymore. And even as kids, the U.S. is probably one of the few countries that circumcises boys for reasons other than religion. A lot of Europe and most of the rest of the world doesn't. It's a moneymaker. Hearing aids are cheap in the rest of the world. If you look at prescription eyewear, it's controlled by manufacturers, distributors, stores, and the insurance company, who are all owned by the same company. They've actually controlled that entire market. There's no reason for this stuff to cost as much as it does, but when they control the market, they set the price. The other thing we're told, hey, this team is a world champion. Really? Who'd they play in the world? Most of our world championship teams only play the United States, maybe Canada. My local airport says they're international. but I think you have to connect to get out of the country, which doesn't really make it international. You look at Michelin restaurants and their ratings. It was invented by the tire maker to get you to use your tires. The whole concept of breakfast is the most important meal of the day, funded by the cereal industry. Who gets tenure in a college? The best teachers? Or the professors who publish the most? And do you know who reads the papers they publish? Nobody. It's a game. I don't even know why we play it. At the end of the day, this stuff is all about money more often than not. As are most things. You've got to sit down and figure out what's really true, follow the money, and see how it came to be. Listening in as Julie and I chat about that very subject. Julie Broad is the founder of self-publishing services firm Book Launchers and an Amazon overall #1 bestseller. Her titles include More Than Cash Flow, which we're going to talk a little bit about, the new brand You, and her latest book, Self-Publish and Succeed. She's an expert on writing a book with marketing in mind. As a matter of fact, many of our guests have come from her. Let's meet Julie. Welcome to Richer Soul, Julie Broad. It's great to have you join us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And I'm excited to learn from you. Let's start at the beginning. What was it like when you were growing up, and how much did your family and school teach you about money?
So I grew up on the side of a highway in a motel. So it's always an interesting, unique story because my parents own and operated a 20-room motel in a tiny town in Alberta, Canada. And I actually learned a lot about money from my parents because I was very actively involved in that business from a very young age. So as soon as I was big enough to carry baskets and things, I was in those rooms, stripping beds to help my parents and making money. And one of my funny stories I always like to share is that as a little girl, I would check people into the motel before I was tall enough to see over the front desk. And people would come in and they'd go, "Are your mom and dad here?" They'd look down at me on the other side and I would go, "I can help you." And my parents would hire babysitters to be in the room beside the desk, not to run the office because I was doing that, but to make sure I was safe.
So, did you mind working? Was it something they expected? Because sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't.
It was my choice. My brother didn't work in the business almost at all. So it was my choice, but I loved from a very young age, like understanding the operation of the business and making money because they paid me for the work that I did. When I wasn't necessarily old enough to work, I was getting paid cash that I would happily take to the bank. And then once I was old enough to be a tax write-off for them, then they would pay me, a fair wage for that work. But I chose to do it. I loved to kind of understand what brought customers in, how did we get them to pay us, and what did we do to get that money in exchange. So it was something I was always interested in.
Do you know where that came from? Was that just something you naturally had then?
I loved money from a very young age. Is that wrong to say? But I was a little kid who would go to the bank with $1 and would put it into the bank, and I had a bank book back in the days when you had a bank book, and I would love watching those dollars creep up inside of my bank.
So then I guess they had a lot of conversations about how the business ran, how you become profitable, looking at the different pluses and minuses and so forth in there.
Yeah, little things, even like my mom, all the sheets were white. It's always a fascinating thing why motels and hotels have white sheets when they can stain so easily. And, my parents were always looking at profits and understanding cost of goods sold and all those things. And my mom would decorate some of the sheets where they had a stain. If it was a brand new set of sheets and it got a stain that they couldn't get out, she would decorate with these trichem. It was like this paint thing that she used, and she'd make flowers on the sheets so that they didn't have to get thrown out when they were new. So I learned a lot from just observing. They didn't always explain to me, okay, this is the cost of this, but I asked questions and I was really interested from an early age. And I was fortunate too that my dad was, he was an investor. He used to be a stockbroker. So he also sat down and taught me about stock trading. And at a young age, we invested in a lot of gold stocks back in the 80s. And that helped me pay for my first year of university too.
Interesting. You got off to a very lucky start then.
I did. School doesn't teach you any of this, like at all. So thankfully I had parents who did.
And that's so true. School doesn't teach you any of this. So you get out, you decide to go to university instead of starting your own business at 18, correct?
Mm-hmm.
What did you pursue?
I went into business school. And it's funny because business school doesn't teach you about money either, really. I mean, they do. But this is one of, and maybe business, I did an MBA, I did an undergrad in international business, and I did an MBA in real estate and finance. And it's funny because having done an MBA in real estate and finance, you would think that we would have learned, finance around real estate. However, what I felt like we were taught to do, at least in my program, was how to be somebody who worked in a very large development company or a very large construction company. So we were taught financial modeling, which to me was just a whole bunch of guessing of what could happen in putting it into a spreadsheet versus actually okay, if you want to go invest, here's how you're going to raise capital. Here's how you're going to do this. All the things I ended up having to teach myself later. It was interesting because I felt like I was taught to be a really good corporate employee.
And I think that's essentially what the purpose of school is, to teach you to be a good corporate employee. They taught you how to model things, but they didn't tell you how to affect the model, did they?
No. And that was the part that drove me crazy through school, was I laughed at how you're just okay, well, we should factor weather into this. And that's going to change the variability of this model by 3%. And, it felt so make believe to me. It was let's guess on a bunch of inputs that are going to give you a number that is going to give you a percentage that you probably could have just pulled that percentage out of the air in the beginning anyways.
Did you argue with them?
A little bit, but I was kind of one of those people who at that point in the game, I was into it. I was like, let's just get through it. But I was very disappointed with my MBA. I had much bigger expectations for an MBA helping me become, because I had an entrepreneurial drive and I knew I was going to be starting a business someday. I'd already gotten into real estate investing before I did my MBA. So I had a lot of those pieces that I thought I was going to get out of an MBA. So halfway through my MBA, I was kind of let's just finish this. I've started it. And I kind of lost heart, honestly, in driving that forward.
So in the meantime, after you got out of university, did you get a job?
I did. I did. But I found a very entrepreneurial company. It was a startup that was a real estate data company. And they had 12 employees. I think when I started, I think I was number 13. So it was a very exciting kind of job. It wasn't going into a big construction company or going into the banks, which is what a lot of my fellow MBA grads did. I went and worked for somebody where I could actually see what the CEO was doing, like the founder of the company. I was his right hand. And so I got to be a part of the inner workings of a lot of the company. So it was fun for a while. And
then what happened?
And then being an entrepreneur, he didn't want to do all the things that I thought the company should do. So, and one of the conversations we had in 2006, I believe, I could see social media coming. I could see the power of writing blogs and content marketing. I saw that evolution, and we were at a data company. I couldn't imagine a greater place to be with content marketing starting to kind of emerge. It's we have all this data, people want to see and get snippets, and we had so much information about the real estate industry in Canada that, I was like, let's start a blog, let's start an email newsletter, let's start a Twitter account. And the founder of the company, he sat me down one day and he goes, Julie, I feel like I'm a blog when you talk. I was like, what? He's like, when you're talking about all this stuff, I feel like I'm the blog. I'm like, okay. Yeah. So he didn't get it. And after a while, he was getting frustrated with me wanting to create this side of the company. And I was getting frustrated with him not seeing the potential. And so I had to go off and do my own thing. And I started my investment company and my training and education company.
So how did that go in the beginning?
Well, so I quit my job in 2008 to go full time into the real estate investing and training and
Perfect
education
timing.
business. Right. Yeah. So I'd already been investing in real estate since 2001. Like I said, before I even did my MBA, I started buying property. So I had, I don't know. I don't remember the numbers. But I had like 12 or 16 properties at the time, but it was not anywhere near like generating income that was going to replace my 6-figure income. But it was one of those things where it just hit that moment where I had to leave the job that I was in. And so I did. And we ended up, I was also a newlywed at the time, and we ended up moving back in with my parents so that we could make ends meet and take whatever money we were earning and put it back into the businesses that we were building. But as tough as it was, 2008, 2009, and even 2010 were phenomenal times to be acquiring property. So it was hard to raise capital and it was hard to get financing without a job. And just getting financing in general was challenging in 2008, 2009. But I mean, those properties were massive money makers for us, because the market was so down in those years. So it was tough, but a gift in many ways.
And that's what it was. I mean, when the markets crashed after '08, there were, and I think it took a little bit longer, at least here. It wasn't until 10 and 11 that you really saw the deals coming out. But that was the time to buy, when you were able to get in on pennies on the dollar, but everybody else was running away. And banks weren't going to touch properties. They were dumping properties because they were in foreclosure, and literally they weren't, they were worth 30 cents on the dollar, 35 cents on the dollar, because the banks overextended on the loans to begin with. I know everyone talks about how real estate is so easy and you make money hand over fist and there's never a problem. Is that what you experienced?
You're laughing because you know it's not. Yeah, I mean, the first couple of properties that I bought were fine. They did well, and they were good quality properties. But once I went back to school, we couldn't qualify, and I say we because I did a lot of my investing with my boyfriend, who eventually became my husband. And once I went back to school, I couldn't qualify for financing anymore. I didn't have a job, and so we had to find creative ways to do deals. And so we took these. Like the Ron LeGrand and some of these other kind of get rich quick kind of courses. And we ended up buying a lot of other people's problem properties, which, made us the not so proud owners of a crack house at one point. We had a property manager rob rent money from us. We had a property manager who punched a tenant, not at our property, at a different property. But the tenant actually fell, hit his head, and later died in hospital. And so we had to deal with a property manager who was on house arrest. Managing our properties. And so there was a lot, and it almost all stemmed from this approach of, getting these properties that are high ratio, lots of income. You can get other people to finance them with BTVs and all these kind of creative strategies, which I suppose have a place, but they ended up creating a lot of problems. And also the mindset that investing is passive income, that I think allows you, if you believe that, you don't put in the couple of hours, and it's not a full-time job, but you should be putting a couple hours into your properties most weeks, even just reviewing what's the property manager doing. Have there been repairs? Did those repairs actually get done? Because we paid for a roof that never got done. And we know that because the next year it was leaking in the same place where the roof was supposed to be replaced. But we never went up on the roof. We never got pictures of the work that was done to verify that it was done. So passive, no. Full-time, no either. Like you got to be actively involved in your investments, but it was fun.
And I think that's what people have to realize is that even though you have a property manager, you need to work with them. You need to manage them. It's not so simple to just set it and forget it. I've heard so many stories of horrible property managers in the sense of just all kinds of problems. And that's one of the issues. If you're not local to your real estate, or if it's difficult, it isn't as easy as they say in all those courses, right?
No. And even if you have a good one, like we had one market where we ended up buying the majority of our properties. We had a great property manager there, And we still had to say, hey, we can raise rents now. Hey, this, like, your market rent that you're asking is too low. We need to raise that rent, because it was easier for them if we didn't raise rents. It was easier for them if we didn't ask that extra $150 a month, because they could fill it a lot easier with less work. So you still had to be active and know your market in order to get the maximum ROI from your property.
And that's interesting because everyone has their own motivating factors. And so the person who's doing the work is probably not getting paid more based on your rent.
Right.
So the easier they make their job, the easier it is for them. They're not worried about your paycheck.
Well, and I mean, our property managers, I believe, were actually getting paid like 10% of the rent. But I mean, for them, $1,200 versus $1,300, that doesn't actually make them that much more money. And it's more work. So it was easier for them not to recommend the rent increases. And we were in an area where there was rent control. So for us, like every year when it's a market could bear it, we wanted to be increasing the rent.
Well, you have to. Otherwise, when you get times like today of inflation, you get behind the curve and you're stuck.
Exactly.
And that's one of the things I don't think people realize about rent control. Rent control actually almost forces property owners to increase prices because they can only do so much, and they almost have to be able to do that. So you wrote a book about all of this. What were some of the lessons learned and surprises from writing that book?
Yeah, I mean, so the first surprise was I thought I had to have a traditional book deal to kind of be a legitimate author. That was the first surprise. And I had friends that got book deals, and I even thought I was getting a book deal with Wiley. But Wiley, after 3 months of working with me, ended up saying I didn't have a strong enough marketing platform to sell books. And so the first piece I learned was, the publisher actually didn't know the best. I knew the market incredibly well. And I knew, the book I ended up writing was More Than Cash Flow. And I knew that nobody had written about their crack houses. Nobody had written about their property managers, because I'd read 60 odd real estate books by this time, and nobody told me about any of that stuff. So I knew this book was something people needed, and that it wasn't something that was already on the market. So the publisher doesn't know. They were just like, no, that general real estate book, it's been done before. But also when I did publish it, because Wiley had so badly killed my ego, I went into it with the mindset of, okay, I'm going to do it better than if Wiley had published my book. And I made it so nobody could look at it and go, this was self-published. It looked like a traditionally published book at the time, but still to this day. And it ended up doing really well. I was #1 on Amazon in Canada for 2 days, like in all print books, but then I was in the top 100 print books for 45 days. So I sold thousands and thousands of books for something Wiley said wouldn't sell. And I was on all the TV media. I was in all the bookstores. I did all the things that I thought you could only do if you were a traditionally published author. So that was the first thing. But the second thing, we were talking before we started, and I said it was really surprising because I shared all of these stories of all the things I did wrong because I knew they needed to be told for other investors. I didn't really think it was going to help my businesses. In fact, I kind of thought that some of my coaching clients would be like horrified that I had gone through these things, but it was actually the opposite. People saw it as such a credibility, and they saw it as credibility that I'd gone through these things, but also that they trusted me because I was so transparent with what I'd gone through and the lessons I'd learned and how to prevent those mistakes, that we had complete strangers calling us with $250,000 and more of capital to invest in our investments. And I had coaching clients that, before my programs weren't full, they were filling, I was raising prices, and it was incredible for both businesses.
And I think being authentic and telling the truth and being a little bit, for lack of a better word, dirty, is actually what people connect with. Today's social media is all perfect, right? Everyone is. But when you look behind the scenes and you see what's going on, you realize it's not. And so I think coming across that way really helps to get that message out. And clearly it worked because people came to you in droves after that.
Yeah. And for me, it also opened up a whole new world for me in self-publishing and books, which I found way more exciting than tenants and toilets and all of that stuff.
So you pivoted, right?
Yeah, not immediately. I mean, I didn't pivot until 2016. I started to kind of exit real estate. The book came out in 2013. And then in 2016, I started to, I wrote a book on branding, personal branding, and I started to dream up book launchers. And then in 2017, I launched book launchers, which, helps other people kind of do what I did with More Than Cash Flow.
And what prompted you to go that direction?
Lots of things. I mean, so I started investing in real estate in 2001 with the plan that it was a backup. It was never supposed to be my full-time thing. I am not that passionate about real estate. I'm passionate about, as we've discussed, I love money. I wanted to have security. I didn't expect a job to ever be the thing that was going to give me security. And so I wanted real estate to kind of be that backup plan. I didn't really want it to be my full-time life. And I was living, eating, breathing real estate. As a little girl, I always thought I'd be a writer, but people told me writers didn't make money. So I ended up in business school. So it's kind of like a perfect harmony of all the things that the writing aspect, the creative. I love teaching. I love helping. So it brought a lot of those pieces together. And I also saw a real need for people to get support publishing a book at the same quality as traditional, but to own their rights, to keep their control so they can address their market in the way that they know it should be addressed and keep all their royalties too.
And that's what I think people don't realize. In the world of books, the actual authors get very little money. And unfortunately, everyone thinks that the publishers are pushing the books. And what I have found, the truth is, the publishers are doing very little to promote your book. If you don't have, as you mentioned, they broke the deal apart because it sounded like you didn't have as much of a marketing machine as they wanted for that particular book. And so that was kind of the way the world worked. And it has dramatically shifted. Today, having self-published books is kind of the way to go, much more so. And you have the ability to do it at very low cost as far as the actual publishing of the book itself, not all the work that goes behind it. And then you have the ability to keep all of your royalties and do it the way you want it, not having to listen to what someone else wants from you.
Yeah. I mean, you can also do things like give it away for free. When you have a publishing deal, like that's out of the question. You can't give the book away for free. You can't use it as a lead generator. You have to buy all the copies you give away from your publisher because you don't actually own the book. They do. So there's a lot of freedoms that you give up in exchange for essentially bookstore distribution. And that's really what a traditional publisher is coming to the table with these days, unless you're a really big name. If you're a really big name, then they will put some marketing juice behind your book. But generally speaking, they're looking at you saying, okay, who are you hiring for PR? What's your social media? What are your social media numbers? What's your newsletter numbers? They're really looking at you, like you said, to be the marketing engine behind that book. And if they don't see a clear path to a lot of book sales, they'll turn you down. But they don't always know. And that's the interesting, that I learned is they thought my book wasn't going to sell. But in fact, realtors and mortgage brokers were so hungry for the truth of what's going to happen that they were so excited. Like that's who sold my book was realtors and mortgage brokers were the ones buying and selling my book because they wanted their clients to read it. So they'd stop telling them to go buy this BTB property or these crazy deals that people would take these courses and then try to get their realtors and mortgage brokers to do.
And again, that's the unfortunate truth. These days, I every so often I see on the TV house flippers or whatever when I'm sitting in an eye doctor's appointment or something. And you look at the numbers and you're like, this ain't possible. I don't know what they're doing or how they're doing it, but this is going to be a disaster in the coming overtime. And the numbers they throw out are wild, too. And they do that in the courses, too. I've sat in some of these sales presentations and they throw these numbers out. And in a sense, they're technically right, but no one's going to pay that. I mean, you have to really find somebody who is a sucker to be able to do some of those types of things. And right now, real estate has been booming. Now it's slowly changing again. So I don't know what the future is and how it will all come together, but we'll watch and see. And that's the biggest thing I think in real estate. And you even said that you have to make the deal. They're not traditional. Real opportunity comes when you can see an opportunity that others don't see.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, a lot of our best deals were houses that sat on the market for a long time. Nobody else wanted them. And I'd walk in and go, this is we can put a perfect suite in here. This is exactly what we want. And so we would buy it and, people go, what? I can't believe you bought that house. And then it would be our best property. So but that's by knowing the market, being out there. But can I tell you a funny story about those house flipping shows? So after my book came out, I was in talks with 3 different production companies because they're really hungry for TV content. And I didn't actually ever think about how these shows worked. And they were like, okay, so they were running through all our deals and they're going, okay, so if we want to do a show around this, you already have to have the deal under contract. And then you have to decide whether you're going to buy it after the fact. So it's like it's so made up. If you wanted to buy an investment property and decide if you were going to buy this investment property, you already had to have the deal on lock because the production schedule takes so long. But then they create the drama after the fact. I was just like, what? Really? Like, there's no actual decision. No, it's already done. That's so funny. So the house flipping, that's what made me think of it. It's all made up. Like, all the numbers are made up.
Today's episode is sponsored by Profit Answer Man Podcast. Did you know that most small business owners hate looking at their financials? It's one reason they may struggle with business success. The Profit Answer Man podcast helps them ensure they are profitable and can pay their employees and weather the storms we all have to face. It's built on the Profit First methodology of pay yourself first. The Profit Answer Man podcast is a must listen to for every small business owner and anyone who wants to help them survive and thrive. Check it out on your favorite listening platform. But here's the thing. It's true in every industry, because even in the book publishing industry, they don't know what's going to sell, right?
No. Yeah.
And they were the experts.
Yeah, exactly.
And the nice thing about picking your own book is you don't have to go through a gatekeeper. And I think more and more life now today is many of the gatekeepers are gone in a variety of different industries. So you have the ability to pick and choose what you want to do and kind of go from there.
Yeah, you can custom make your own plan for a lot of things now, which is great. It can also be overwhelming for people, which is why it's great to have services and companies that can guide you through some of the processes. But because it can be overwhelming to be like, you could do it whatever way you want.
Oh, and by the way, I don't think people realize a lot of my guests actually come from books that you have published.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how we know each other, really, is through all the authors that you have had on your show that have worked with us to produce their book.
So you all know that they're all great authors and they've done it themselves and they've figured out a path. And that's, I think, the reason many of them are on is because they're bringing out information that others aren't. And that's what I find most helpful, is that they are coming with a different message, not the same message that everyone else has, which is why probably traditional publishing didn't work for them.
Yeah, and I think that's important for people to realize too, is that creating a hook that is just a little bit different, right? I mean, my More Than Cashflow book, 70% of the book is the same old real estate fundamentals of choosing a market, how to calculate the numbers, how to find tenants. But it's the 30% that I'm talking about that's different as far as, okay, if you make this kind of a property decision, you might end up with a property manager who takes advantage of you. If you make this kind of a decision, this might happen. And that was the different angle that I took. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's real estate investing. 70% of what I'm going to say is the same as the other books. But you have to find that piece that makes you a little different. And finding that thing that you run contrary to, maybe the reason a publisher says no, but it could be the very reason your book does extremely well.
And I think that's true in all marketing. If you, especially today with the world of social media, if you're saying what everyone else is saying, you're just noise in the crowd. Until you have a different angle, a different viewpoint, and you get that out there, You essentially are noise in the crowd, unfortunately.
It's a good way to put it. I mean, there's an element of what you have to do to fit in, because then you're trusted. If you're way too out there, then you won't be trusted. And at the same time, you have to stand out. So it's like this art and science of fitting in and standing out at the same time.
I read a lot from Seth Godin, and that's a big part, I think, of what he always talks about. You have to be a little bit crazy, but grounded in something that's familiar. If you go too far out, nobody will follow you because it's too hard to believe. But if you take something that's in that in between and you just make a small change to it or a different angle to what's known, people are much more accepting of it. And so that's what you have. So you took a proven way to make money, real estate, but you put your spin, which was different on it.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So what have you found? You have a lot of authors that come to you. What is it that makes one successful in that particular space of writing a book?
Yeah, I mean, some of it is a tiny bit of luck. Like timing can help tremendously. So there is that tiny bit that is luck, but I really find that the piece that makes people stand out is exactly what we just talked about, is knowing the thing that makes them just a little bit different. So the people that are able to say, I've been in the financial planning industry for X number of years, and everybody believes this, but this one thing is one thing I run contrary to, or I believe something slightly different. So I find if somebody comes to me and they're saying, I'm writing this book because I want to be a bestseller, and that's all they've got, right? Which is, you'd laugh, but I get that a lot. Like, people just want the book to be out for that end goal of being a bestseller, versus the person who comes to me and says, everybody believes this, and I think just this little bit different. And I think that there's a lot of other people like me or that would benefit from this story, this angle. There's a lot of marketing juice behind that and a lot of potential behind that. Going for the bestseller focuses completely on you. And, that rarely works. You have to be focused on the reader that you're going to help and giving them an outcome of the outcome and knowing how you're going to help them in a way that they have not found kind of the solution that's right for them. So it's a lot of pieces, but I feel like it's all contained in this element of how are you just that little bit different, and who specifically are you going to help with that little bit of difference that you offer.
And that makes a lot of sense. It's being a little bit different so that you do have that message. And I think, again, if everybody wants these days, it's not hard to have a best-selling book, right? That's the other secret that's out there. There are so many different categories that they've niched it down to the point that almost everyone can be a bestseller in their category. Although they don't mention that. They just say they're a bestseller, right?
Yeah.
And honestly, the actual, do people really follow like the New York Times bestseller list anymore or any of that stuff? Does it matter, or is it just?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, because I do think there's a cachet to the New York Times bestselling list, and to say you're a New York Times bestseller, there still is, especially in the consulting world, even in the speaking world, to say that as a clarifying thing to your bestseller kind of tag is, I think, important. It's also interesting because Amazon itself will not let you put bestseller on it unless you can verify it through New York Times or Wall Street Journal or one of the media. So if you're an Amazon bestseller, Amazon won't even let you call yourself a bestseller, which I also disputed, right? Because I was number one in print books. And so I thought that I should be able to say, I was number one on Amazon, not in a category, but in print books. But Amazon was like, no, we don't allow anybody to declare themselves an Amazon bestseller. So that tells you how much the algorithm gains it, such that Amazon doesn't even put credibility behind it.
I mean, people don't realize how much goes behind a book launch and all of the things that are involved with that. And even getting on the New York Times bestseller list is a game in and of itself. It's
a curated list. So even if you sell the most books in a week, that doesn't mean you're going to be on the New York Times bestseller. They generally will only, especially in the nonfiction, they're only going to put you on there if you are from one of the major 5 publishing houses. So even small presses still often get excluded. And then if you lean politically a way that they're not they're not in support of, they won't even look at your book. So it's like there's kind of a filtration system that works by their editorial team. And they've been sued over this, and they've basically declared this is a curated list. It is not an official bestseller list. Even though they get to call it the New York Times bestsellers, it's their editorials filter of what is a bestseller.
So it's what is best sold to the New York Times editorial staff.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, a lot of authors will sell more copies, but they've sold it, through channels that they don't count, or they've sold it and they're self-published. I think James Altucher, he had a book called Choose Yourself, and that was one that I can't remember the number. I had research on this, where he had sold I think 10,000 more than the number of books that week that was in, I don't remember the exact numbers, but he'd sold more than that week's New York Times bestseller, but he never made the list because he was self-published.
I have that book here somewhere.
So you know the book I'm talking about. Yeah,
I know the book you're talking about. Yeah, that was when.
So it was interesting.
James is a little crazy, and that was his little bit of spin, right? He went out and he would tell all these stories about his life, and he was a little bit nutty.
Yeah, he sold all his stuff and lived in Airbnbs for a while.
He's been on a roller coaster of a ride throughout his life, and
he sure has. Yeah,
that's fine. Everyone has their right to be whatever quirky they want to be. So, what is the outcome of writing a book? I mean, it seems to me today, at least a lot of the people that I deal with, it turns out to be a business proposition. It helps them to build their brand, build their authority, or create a name for themselves.
Yeah, I mean, everybody can kind of get a different outcome from it. Some people get an outcome even just through the writing process because they gain clarity of message, which can feed into everything that they're doing and helps them grow their business just by having clarity. But typically people are doing it because it gets them speaking engagements and usually gets them paid, or it grows their business as a lead magnet, a generator. It opens doors. Again, a lot of people that are on that we placed with you as an example, it's because of their book launch. It's that tool. It's like, oh yeah, I checked out their book. This is interesting. Yes, I'll have them on for a conversation. So it is that tool that opens doors for a lot of things that maybe weren't open before. It builds relationships when you're not in the room. It's like a scalable relationship builder because people read the book, they get to know you, they feel like they know you. So there's lots of outcomes. And I do believe book sales is another one. Like it is almost a passive income if you've got momentum. Like more than cash flow, I don't promote at all anymore. And it still sells. I'm still making money almost 10 years later from that book. So there is a little bit of passive income there.
Do you know what percentage of books are actually read that are purchased?
No, but that's a fascinating question. And Amazon would have that data to a point, right? With their ebooks, they probably have that data, but they hold a lot of that. I don't know, but I know personally, especially when it comes to ebooks, but even print books, I probably only read 25% of the books that I buy, and that might even be high. So I don't know. That would be a very interesting. I have friends that have stacks of books and they keep buying books and they still haven't read the books they bought 3 years ago. So.
And it's funny because that's what I've heard, that many of the books that are purchased are never actually read. And it's interesting. And I know in the world of courses, it's the same thing. The amount of courses that are sold and the people that actually finish them is a very small percentage.
It's because the act of buying kind of fulfills this need that we have to take action towards a problem we want to solve. And I mean, a lot of the marketers, I used to take a lot of information marketing courses, and a lot of the marketing is actually geared towards consumption, which is kind of sad in a lot of ways. But that is how that's how our psychology works, is that taking action on buying actually satisfies some of the driving need that made you feel like you had to take action in the first place.
So how do we change that? Because at the end of the day, people aren't taking the action.
Yeah. And I mean, that's why I emphasize the outcome of the outcome. Because if you're selling a book that people go, oh, that sounds interesting, I'll buy it, versus the book that people go, I need to read that book, that's a very different feeling, right? If you have a fear of missing out, but you don't have a clear need to get that outcome, those are two different emotional situations, which is why I really encourage people to focus on the outcome of the outcome. So you're not just, I always use my dad as an example because I've talked about this before, but he's bald. He's been bald since he was 28. People selling hair regrowth, they're never going to appeal to my dad because he doesn't care. He's made peace with no hair like decades and decades ago. But there's guys who think that hair will get them, a date. They find their lifelong mate, or maybe they'll get promoted. And so the outcome of the outcome isn't the hair, right? It's that promotion. It's that date. And you have to sell that, the problem that they really care about, and sell the solution to that. And that will get your book read.
That's changed, right? Because I remember 20 years ago, everybody was selling hair plugs. Today, everyone's just shaving their head. Like, the world changed. Back then, nobody had a beard. Today, everyone's got a bald head and a beard.
Well, it's funny because I'm actually in a group where two of the people have gone and gotten the surgery. So I'm not certain that's actually changed. I think maybe it's the investment of time, because it's taken time, right, for the growth for the bugs to kind of grow in and for it to look natural. So for some, they probably can't be bothered, but for some, it's still a thing.
Most of the younger people I see don't seem to be bothered, but it is whatever it is that you want. That's up to people to decide what works for them. As I'm thinking through our conversation, it's almost like going all the way back to where you started in school. Oh, you go to business school to learn business. Nope, that didn't work, right? You expect people at the MBA program to teach you certain things, and that's not the case. And even with writing the book, or, everyone's saying you got to put out this perfect, it's not always the case. It's actually doing what's different from everybody else, not following the path, almost seems to be what brings success.
Yeah, I think going into everything you do with curiosity versus acceptance. I think a lot of people, kind of go, okay, this is the proof, this is the path. I go to school, I get a job, I do this thing. And I didn't necessarily, and a lot of the people I work with don't necessarily say that's not the path, but they go, okay, well, what else could there be? Or what's another way? What's a different approach? And I think that curiosity, that willingness, that ability to question, I think that opens a lot of doors. And it also helps you spot those paths that are open, that are available, that other people have missed. And that's where I think a lot of the cool investment opportunities, business opportunities, book opportunities, I think that's where a lot of those can come from. It's just being a little curious and being willing to venture where maybe everybody else isn't going, or where everybody says you should go. Is just kind of going, well, what if I do this instead and see what happens?
And to me, that's almost like critical thinking, which is not taught anymore. And it's the one thing I'm hearing every employer says to me is they want people who can actually think and do the job and don't need to be babysat through everything. And unfortunately, I think it's a skill that we have moved away from.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I think school does that to us. Not to pick on school, but you look at the way it's set up, and it's like, do what you're told and get the high scores on the exams, and this will happen. And so you're not rewarded for trying and failing. Right? You're rewarded for doing exactly what you're told. And I think that is killing the ability to think in a lot of ways. And I do think school has its place in a lot of ways. But, I think school could be improved dramatically for that exact reason. I always tell my son, I'm like, he's building his Legos. He's only 5, but he's building his Legos and it doesn't work. And I'm like, great, you just figured out a way it doesn't work. Now let's try again and figure out a way that might work. I'm celebrating the try and the effort versus the perfect build, because I think school celebrates the perfect build.
We struggled with Legos when my kids were little, because you have to buy this one set and then you build that one item. And then what? What do you do with it then? You're done. And I lucked out one day at the Goodwill store, and I literally bought an entire tub, and I mean a massive tub full of Legos. And I just brought them home, and the kids all loved it, and their friends would come over. It's like, build what you want, figure something out, be creative. And when you're done, take it apart and do it again. You're not locked into this piece goes here and this goes like that and follow this rule and you have to be perfect. I just think Lego has come back out with some of sets which are just pieces, but I think most people don't just buy pieces and have fun. They want to follow instructions and build X, and then I don't know what they do with it.
That's where my son's creativity really shone, is my mom, because I kept complaining that there wasn't bricks. Like, he was taking them apart and trying to build things, but there wasn't enough bricks to do anything with. So she found some Legos too. Like, she had a used place where she could buy a whole bunch of bricks, and she bought a bunch of bricks. And now he's building all, like last night was a haunted pizza place. But I think you're right. Like, having the constraints of here's the instructions, here's what you do, doesn't build those critical thinking, the creativity, okay, what if I put this here? What happens? And I think the more that everyone kind of just does a little bit, like, you don't have to go radical, like everybody's going here, so I'm going to go totally the other way. It's just like that little bit of, okay, what happens if I just try it this way? Like, just do this one thing different, like just a little bit different. I think really cool opportunities can present themselves. Of course, you'll fail miserably sometimes. But there's also great gifts in that.
But I think that's where people don't realize sticky notes are the result of failure, right? We're talking about hair growth. Minoxidil is the result of failure. It wasn't a hair growth drug. It was designed for something else. We used to have a lot more failures that created a different success. And today it seems like we're so perfect in our exploration. We don't explore where it can take us afterwards.
Yeah, WD-40. I mean, you know where the 40 comes from, right? Do you know the story? WD-40, 40 attempts before they got it right.
It was the 40th, right? WD stands for something, wheel, or I forget what it is. I just read it the other day, but it was the name of what they were trying to, I thought it was like wheel drying or something.
It has to do with water. Water displacement, because it's the oil. I think it's water displacement. I think it is. Don't quote me on that.
Well, they failed 39 times and 40 worked. And so there you go. They didn't even come up with a creative name. And yet it's a household name today. And that's kind of what it is. Well, I heard that, and I didn't realize that. I heard Google was not Google. They misspelled it when they first started. And it ended up being, I thought they said it was Googel originally from something. Again, I don't know if that's true. We should all test. Don't believe everything you hear and find out if it's real or not real and see what it is. Well, we've been talking a little bit about taking action, and we always love to get people to take an action step. What is something people can do this week to take a step forward?
Well, I think maybe it's going to come out of the question we've been asking is what is something that is just either contrarian? Like, what do you think that's just a little bit different than the commonly held beliefs in your industry? Or even going into it with that question of curiosity, like, what could you do that's just a little bit different? But I like the whole angle of, what do you believe? Like, what's the passive income of your industry? What do you believe that's just a little bit different than what everybody else is saying?
And I think that's excellent, because we don't want to be too far, just a little bit off. And you take the chance and you go and you keep testing. And it's not that hard to try that far off the edges. It's not so scary. And you keep doing it until it works.
Yeah, keep testing. Keep going, what if I do this just a little different? What if I do this a little different? And then, come back and tell us what you did and what happened.
It's time to learn the secrets of life. What's your secret to living an abundant life?
I keep taking action. My belief is the missing piece is always action, and abundance is on the other side.
And that's literally what it is, right? It's small baby steps. Take little bits of action and you pivot and you go. You started with a real estate book and ended up becoming a book publisher. You wouldn't have done that had you not taken the first step. And that's it. Take a step, pivot, learn, and keep going. What did you learn later in life that you wish you would have learned sooner?
Oh boy. I think that being yourself, like being transparent and authentic in yourself, is actually a really big gift. I spent a lot of years pretending to be something I wasn't. And once I really embraced myself and who I was and was okay with the people who didn't like that, that's where I think the real magic starts to happen.
Don't be afraid.
Which is easier said than done, right? Because again, we're taught to kind of conform and fit in and be a certain way, right? Like just fitting with our whole conversation we've had today, it's hard to be yourself if yourself is that person who goes around going, well, what if we did it different? That person doesn't always get the A+ because they're going, hey, I think that we shouldn't do this model because this model is silly.
And that's so true. Which brings us to our final question. If you were to give an 18-year-old one piece of wisdom, what would it be?
Well, unless you want to be a doctor or an engineer, I would probably say go find somebody doing what you want to do and go learn from them versus going to school to learn it. You may still want to go to school at some point, but I wouldn't say you have to go to school to become the person you want to become. Go learn from the person doing the things you're most excited about.
And even if you want to become a doctor or an engineer, I would say go hang out with them first to see if it's really what you think it is. Because I can't tell you how many doctors graduate from their residency and go, if I had only known.
What a good point. And that's true. And I think a lot of people actually go to school to become a doctor because their parents almost force them into it. But I think spending a year kind of working alongside a doctor might change your mind. So that's a great point.
Very much so. If people would like to learn more about you, your company, where's the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, I hang out on YouTube at booklaunchers.tv. So if you kind of want to connect and chat with me, that's the best place. But my company, booklaunchers.com. And if you want support to start writing your own book and stand out and be a little different, you can go to booklaunchers.com/7 steps. I'm pretty sure Rocky has all the links for you, but that will give you a workbook to kind of think through the hook of your book and the outcome of the outcome and who you're helping.
Awesome. And we'll make sure to put those in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I looked up the Google thing. It's actually derived from a misspelling of his original name, which was, and I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's Googol, which is a mathematical term for the number 1 followed by 100 zeros. So I ask you, what are the things that are true, right? Everyone thinks buying real estate is passive and easy. It's not. It's difficult. You have to deal with tenants. You have to deal with all the different rules that are out there. You get phone calls in the middle of the night unless you have a person who does it for you. And as you heard, those people are not always reliable. So now you got to manage them. Again, ask yourself, what's true? What's not true? How did this come to be? And should I trust it? I think there's a lot of surprises out there if you take the time to dig in. One of the biggest is Rudolph was invented by Montgomery Ward. The whole diamond industry and engagement rings, all of that stuff. Keep asking yourself, is it true? And why did that come to be? Our action step this week falls right in line with what we've been talking about the whole time. What do you believe that's different than what everybody else is saying? What do you do differently? How can you take advantage of that? See, that's where the opportunities lie, in those differences where you see things that others can't. That's where great opportunity is made. Next week, we've got another great episode with Amy Silvis, The 5 Freedoms. She also does real estate, but here's the interesting thing. When she was very young, they told her she wouldn't live. Well, the fact that she's on here shows it wasn't true. Wow, this theme just keeps coming up. If you enjoyed today's episode, question, who else do you know who could enjoy it as well? Would you do me a favor and share it with them? I'd appreciate that. Maybe together you can find some things that just aren't true. Thanks for listening. Have an abundant week.